Bitcoin certainly did enter the geopolitical scene, right? It's and it has come a long way because it has come from cryptographic programmer's toy, basically, to a collectible that has some value to an asset.
There is no doubt that Bitcoin and blockchain technology have started a revolution against centralized systems. Finance, investment, social media, data storage, and many other sectors will continue to benefit from the technology for decades to come. If you have been following the asset's progress, you will realize it has been gradually evolving to what it has become today. Anonymous institutional investor and Bitcoin analyst Plan B says that Bitcoin has gone through 3 important phases so far and is now ready for the next important phase of adoption. Welcome to Savvy Finance. This video examines Plan B's outlook for Bitcoin in 2022 and beyond, as well as his thoughts about the next phase of adoption for the digital asset. Please watch the video to the end and drop a thumbs up. Enjoy the video. Plan B is a prominent institutional investor and Bitcoin analyst, most popular for his work on the stock-to-flow model. The anonymous and pseudonymous analyst believes Bitcoin is a plan B for staying afloat when the inevitable downfall of fiat currencies finally occurs. His Twitter tag, $100 trillion, alludes to the hyperinflation of the Zimbabwean dollar and his belief that a similar thing will occur to the US dollar. In an hour-long interview, Plan B gives his 2022 outlook for Bitcoin. The analyst explains that 2 scenarios can play out for the world's biggest cryptocurrency. The first scenario sees institutions classifying Bitcoin as a tech stock or even a meme stock, which would fall if there is a rise in interest rates. In this scenario, not a lot of money gets into Bitcoin, which means a stunted growth for the asset in 2022. The second scenario sees Bitcoin being considered a commodity or even a currency with a yield curve, a Sharpe ratio higher than 1 and a direct arbitrage with fiat currencies. Plan B adds that he believes the second scenario is more probable for an asset with Bitcoin's track record. Here is the institutional investor painting a vivid picture of the 2 scenarios.
Basically 2 scenarios. One is the meme stock scenario. In low interest rates environments that we have had, a lot of money will be misallocated to maybe not so good investments, meme stocks. I'm quite sure that institutional investors who are, well, at least in Europe and at least the ones I know, not very fond of Bitcoin, not very known to Bitcoin as well. I know for Fidelity that's very, very different. It's like the white raven out there. A lot of institutional investors see Bitcoin as a tech stock and maybe even a meme stock. So one of the candidates that will go down when interest rates go up. And this misallocation of capital into the funny stocks, unwinds. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is, of course, well, Bitcoin is a more like a commodity currency, even with a yield curve or an interest rates at least not that far out as the US dollar, at least 1 year out, a Sharpe ratio of at least higher than 1. Which is very unique for Bitcoin. It has very high volatility, but the upside potential is even higher. So it makes a very crazy investment, actually. One that is the only one out there with return above volatility. And yeah, I think there is also an arbitrage relationship there with interest rates and with currencies. And we didn't talk about it, but we talked about the link between the rates, the interest rates, the bonds, and the equity market. We didn't, but there's also a very tight link, maybe even tighter, because it's a direct arbitrage, and it's also mathematical, between foreign exchange and interest rates. For example, the 1-year interest rates in Europe is minus 25 basis points. The 1-year rate in the US is 1.25, I guess. So that's 150 basis points between them. If the US is going to raise interest rates and Europe is not, that makes the dollar more interesting, more attractive, and money will flow to the dollar will get stronger. And there's a very direct arbitrage relationship. Futures, of course. You can buy dollars or sell euros right now or 1 year ahead, capture that spread. And if you look at Bitcoin as a currency, you can do the exact same thing through the exact same mechanism, namely the futures. So you can lock in, and currently it's low, but you can lock in like 8, 9, 10% in futures and finance that with negative yielding euros, for example. And I think maybe I'm so much focused on it because I'm in Europe and the rates are negative. I see Bitcoin as a unique asset with a asymmetric upside, a positive Sharpe ratio, and a direct arbitrage with fiat currency. That is the total opposite than a meme stock. Those are the 2 extreme scenarios. I think the latter we'll see the latter and not the meme stock scenario. But that will be the interesting thing to watch, well, I guess next couple of months.
More interestingly, Plan B talks about the phases of Bitcoin. He explains that the asset started out as a toy for programmers with no use cases and limited spread. During the early stages, only a handful of people had heard of Bitcoin or even had the asset. The next phase, according to Plan B, was the collectible phase. Then more people had Bitcoin, and it was slowly proving to be a valuable investment. This phase was championed by retail investors and gave way to the asset phase. For the past 2 years, giant institutions and corporations have been adding Bitcoin to the balance sheet. For example, Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy presently holds 125,051 Bitcoin. At today's price of around $39,300 per Bitcoin, that's worth over $4.9 billion. More institutions are accumulating, and the asset phase is giving way to another phase. Plan B declares that Bitcoin is entering the geopolitical scene and establishing its status as a currency. As we all know, El Salvador has made the first bold move by declaring Bitcoin as a legal tender. Recently, the Central American reported a 30% increase in tourism since it made Bitcoin a legal tender. It has also had a double-digit jump in its GDP. Though not without other troubles, the country has been and will continue to benefit greatly from the move. Plan B states that El Salvador has opened up the next phase for Bitcoin adoption, and other countries like Mexico and Brazil will soon make similar moves.
Whatever the future may bring, Bitcoin certainly did enter the geopolitical scene, right? And it has come a long way, because it has come from a cryptographic programmer's toy, basically, to a collectible, has some value, to an asset that even institutional investors take serious, like Fidelity, and companies use on their treasury accounts as money, like MicroStrategy. And right now we have seen, of course, the first country adopted El Salvador, which is a very small country. Certainly, if that has some follow-up, well, bigger countries like Mexico, Brazil, or I don't think Turkey, but some bigger country would be opening the entire geopolitical discussion that was pioneered by El Salvador. And maybe, I like to think in phases. Those are the phases, I think. Yeah, and I think this is a very important phase, a make or break phase. And I agree with Jurrien. Bitcoin is too big, and governments will not choose to ban it, but to regulate it and to tax it. That's at least what we're seeing right now.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah?
That's just such a cool analogy that you have with the phases. Would you mind just briefly explaining the phase analogy for the listeners?
Yeah, phase transition is something from physics. The same thing can be different things. Well, that sounds funny, but for example, water can be fluid, it can be ice, it can be vapor. Just when it passes a threshold, the temperature would go into a different phase. And you see that in a lot of things. In fact, the dollar also switched phase in 1971, when it was, before that, it was coupled to gold. After that, it was not. It was just floating around in fiat. So Bitcoin also has these phases where, well, like I said, jumped from a toy to collectible, to an investment, an asset, and maybe now to geopolitical currency. Well, legal tender, right? And it's the same Bitcoin, it's the same software, but it makes a jump. It's physical assets. Very interesting, and there is a very fundamental dilemma or discussion with central banks to be had here, because if you imagine a small country like El Salvador making the step to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, it shuts the door to the IMF, because that normally a country like El Salvador would get a loan from the IMF, and the IMF would have some criteria that El Salvador has to fulfill, and then it gets the loan and blah blah blah. But right now, of course, it's sort of fighting the IMF, or IMF is not happy, and it opens some discussion. For me personally, having talked to central banks and having worked with central banks a lot, Bitcoin being the best currency that there is, because it's absolute scarcity, because of its portability, because nobody can debase it, etc., etc. And the other story that central banks believe in, that a currency has to be controlled and has to be, you have to, like the Fed, be able to print money, to taper, and to steer and control the economy. You have to accommodate when the economy needs it, and you have to tighten things up if it's possible. And I guess that control, they're not going to give up unless they see absolute scarcity, and the non-control will bring more benefits to the world. And that very and I'm not sure if I say that right, but that very fundamental, I see that very fundamental difference in view between central bankers. Just don't see Bitcoin as money because it cannot be printed. And Bitcoiners see it as the perfect money because The same argument, it cannot be printed. We have to discuss that. But the geopolitical phase, I guess the ultimate phase, and very much looking forward to that phase.
Plan B has unpacked a lot of interesting information in this interview, from his analysis of the scenarios to Bitcoin's new role as an asset in the geopolitical scene. We especially love his analogy of the phases. It brings into perspective just how far Bitcoin has gone and the journey that stretches ahead of it. In addition to its status as a great investment asset, Bitcoin is proving to be a great tool that binds people together during times of crisis. Last week, we saw this play out in Canada after Justin Trudeau invoked the Emergency Act. A similar scenario is playing out in Ukraine. People are sending hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies to support groups and NGOs supporting the Ukrainian armed forces. Even when egomaniac leaders threaten our peace and safety, we will find solace with one another and conquer. That's all we have for this video. Don't forget to put Ukraine and the rest of the world in your prayers. Thanks for watching the video. Please click the like button and drop your comments in the comment section below. Until our next video, stay safe and have a great day.